Had a Shasta College. How y'all doing? It is Thursday, the 5th of October. Um, Went up to 95 degrees today. Just thought I'd tell you unless you missed out on that. We're not over summer yet. Hope you all doing well. Got your essays in. I gave you some more time in that last essay because I had a couple people struggling to make the deadline. It's okay. I made the deadline this weekend. Means your papers better be worthy of it. I'm sure they will be. Anyway, I'm not going to sign an essay. The next thing you're going to do is a quiz. I'm not going to sign that today, though. Soon, look for it. Um, we're still in the 1960s. We're just creeping up to an important decade, but we're not there yet, which is the 70s. But before we get there, I want to talk about three films that revolutionized the film industry, revolutionized Hollywood, when the film noirs, the film youth market, the film cinephiles, the film students stormed the gates and grabbed the reins of power and were able to direct some films, write some films that meant everything to the history of cinema. Perhaps one of the most revolutionary, meaningful eras of our cinema history. And it started with these three films. I mean, it was getting started. If you listen to my last lecture, people like Roger Corman were making films for the youth market, biker movies, and making beach party movies, horror movies, low budget horror movies, and for the drive in movie theater. And that was a huge market that Hollywood did not know how to tap into because they were still trying to make films the old fashioned way, big budget, lots of movie stars, lavish special effects, and the students were staying away. The youth market, let's say people under 25, were staying away. They couldn't relate to it. They needed to see something to relate to. So, what's going on in the world at this time? Well, a lot. We come through the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Now, the Vietnam is going full bore, folks. There's a draft. There are campus unrest. There are protests in the streets because nobody wants to go fight in this war against communism that we didn't believe in. The students, that is. The other generation believed in it wholeheartedly. They thought the communists were going to take over and they're going to control all of us. That was the fear. And so we're fighting it in a far off South Asian country called Vietnam. No one had ever heard of it before this, but now it was on the nightly news every night. And as our death toll raised, so did the Vietnamese death toll. Our anger, disruption in the streets, unsatisfaction with the government, which at this time was Lyndon Johnson was the president. Yes, he was a Democrat, a good old liberal boy who did some very good things like the Civil Rights Act, but he was keeping the Vietnam War going because he was getting some bad advice from some right wing generals, and he didn't know what to do. So the war continued. They kept escalating, thinking that was the solution. And so in this time, they upped the ante of troops over there, over 500,000 troops. It's a lot of troops. How did they get those troops? Put the draft in place. So a lot of the men were on the run, the boys. Um, Coming out of film schools were the new batch of directors that are going to take over Hollywood for the next 10 years or so. They didn't know it, of course. They hadn't even had their chance yet, but they're coming up to the plate. These three directors here that directed these three movies um, fall into that category, sort of. Two of them for sure. The third one, not so sure. He was established director already. But the films I want to talk about that changed all of this that sent college students to the movie theaters over and over again to see these movies several times. Like the next generation will go see Star Wars a million times. The next generation will go see Top Gun 100 times. Next generation will go see Frozen a million times. Well, these are the, the go-to movies. They were smart, intelligent, artistic, and they're about youth and their problems, what they're going through. And I'm going to start off with a movie called Bonnie and Clyde, which was the first of this bunch. It came out in 1967. Now, Bonnie and Clyde's about two criminals in the 1930s. Who would have thought that would be relevant to the 60s goings on? We got rock and roll, we got um, Jimi Hendrix and Cream and the Beatles, and everybody's going full blast. Everybody's smoking pot, dropping acid, growing their hair long, and they want a different world. And here comes Bonnie and Clyde about two people that actually existed in real life in the early 30s of the Depression era. But the way they filmed it, Arthur Penn directed it. He had directed some movies before. He was directed films in the 50s on live television. It was called in those days. They directed live TV shows. If I ever teach the television class again, you should take it because we delve into that a lot. Anyway, but they don't offer it a lot here at Shasta College. Too bad. Anyway, what is my point? Oh, so we got Arthur Penn at the helm, and we got a young, handsome actor named Warren Beatty who's going to produce it. He developed the script. He got an unknown actress to star as Bonnie Parker, Faye Dunaway, and there's a lot of graphic violence in it for the day. The first use of slow motion violence that we've seen in the ending of the film, and a soundtrack of that became very, very, very popular. It's a lot of banjo music, and people just really loved it. The reason why they loved it, and you'll see in the documentary you're going to have to watch for the quiz, um, it was a thinly disguised version of Youth in Revolt. And kids, students would love this movie. The adults didn't quite get it because it glorified two gangsters. And, but they did it in such a sexy way. Uh, it was like they were like icons, rock and roll icons, and yet there's no rock and roll music in this movie. Bonnie and Clyde, yeah, was a revolution. We hadn't seen anything like that. And after that came out, other filmmakers stepped up to the plate to direct their own versions of Youth in Revolt. And the next one up would be The Graduate, directed by Mike Nichols, who had directed one other movie, that's all. A great debut movie, and Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, which is based on a Edward Albee stage play. And the movie is shot in glorious black and white by Haskell Wexler and stars a married couple at the time, two of our really greatest actors in cinema history, Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor. And it's about middle-aged college professor who's an alcoholic who's been passed over for a head of the department job, and his unhappy but very sexually aware wife. And they, for the next 2 hours, they go to war with each other because they're having a party. They bring over a young couple to have this party with them. George Siegel and Sandy Denny were unknown actors at the time. That's it, folks. There's only four people in the whole movie. And they come to this house to have dinner and drinks, and boy, do they drink. And once they drink, the hostility begins and the sexual dance begins. And the war is on. It is a warfare between the old married couple, and the fact that he's been passed over for many jobs. She's unable to have a child, so the relationship is wanting. It's missing the love that maybe that child could have given them to keep them together. And so what they do, his wife makes up a fake child, says he's away at school. There is no child. And that's what she lives on, that hope. And during the night, the crazy night of drinking, 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 and parlor games and sexual flirtations with the two couples, the secret is revealed. There is no son. They did have one, but he was born dead. And the bubble is burst. And hopefully the relationship will survive this. Brutal, brilliant, brilliant film. Mike Nichols was uh, part of a comedy team. Elaine May and Mike Nichols. They're the toast of the town in the late 1950s. Smart, edgy satire. And then he's directed some plays on Broadway, Barefoot in the Park, which is a Neil Simon play. He directed some other things, and he got a chance to direct this Edward Albee play, and turn it into a masterpiece in brutal filmmaking, realistic, honest emotions. And so he got to direct this next film called The Graduate, and it starred an unknown by the name of Dustin Hoffman, based on a book about a student who returns, and he returns to his house after graduation. What's he going to do with his life now? He doesn't know. He's he's aimless. He won all the awards in college. Now he's living with his parents back in LA, like a posh area of LA, Beverly Hills, Bel Air, somewhere like that. And he's just wasting his life. And his parents are wondering what he's going to do next. They want him to go to grad school, get a PhD. In the meantime, he's a young man and he's frustrated, like so many young people are, with his place in the world, doesn't understand his place in the world, what to do next. And so he begins an affair with an older woman, Mrs. Robinson, played by the late great Anne Bancroft. Uh, his dad is a lawyer, and he's partnered with another lawyer, and this woman is his partner's wife, and that's how he knows her. And one night, a drunken party's at the house of it's a graduation party at his house, and all the dad's friends are there, but not Benjamin didn't have any friends. It's all his parents' generation's friends, and they're all giving him advice about what to do. He's got a great future ahead of him. It's all about making money and that kind of thing. And he has to take the wife of his partner's wife home because she's a little too drunk to drive. And so he takes her home to her posh house in Beverly Hills. She invites him in for some more drinks, and guess what, folks? She slips her dress off, offers her naked body to him, and it scares the living hell out of him. And she just says, I'm available to you. Just say when. He doesn't know what to do. He's terrified, but he's intrigued. He calls her up a couple days later, and they meet at a hotel, and they start an affair. And they meet a couple times a week at this posh hotel in Beverly Hills, and just for sex, folks. And he feels guilty about it, bad, because it's his parents' friend, not his generation. Although Anne Bancroft was only 6 or 7 years older than Dustin Hoffman at the time, but she was supposed to be 20 years older, a different generation. Um, she was still awfully hot and sexy, so he was okay with that. Well, they have a daughter who is college age. I'm saying his the woman he's having an affair with has a daughter. Dustin Hoffman doesn't have a daughter with this woman. and she's coming home for Easter break, and everybody wants these two to have a date, except for Mrs. Robinson. It's the idea of his partner's husband and his parents want this to happen. You must go out with Elaine Robinson. She's going to be perfect for you. The mother, who's not happy with this, says, You're not going to date my daughter. I don't care what you do. Do not date her." But of course, when he meets her, she's lovely, beautiful, young, his age. She's still going to Berkeley, still in school, and he falls haplessly in love with her for reals. And he goes against the Mrs. Robinson's wishes, and all hell breaks loose. There's a great soundtrack to it by Simon and Garfunkel. Maybe you've heard of the song "Sounds of Silence." Mrs. Robinson, At the Zoo, those are all in there. Those songs are written. They were written before the movie, but Mike Nichols got the rights to use them, and the rest is history. That was a huge hit album. We all had it as kids. I went to see this movie with my mother, and she loved it, and I loved it. We could both understand the generational thing. And there's someone up on the screen who's sort of our age and living out a world we like to live in. I mean, after you see that movie, you want to go to college, you want to meet somebody like that and have an affair with somebody like that. And you couldn't wait to go to college if that's what college life looked like. Of course, there's a romanticized version of it. And it tapped into something in the American psychic of youth market, once again, that the youth market related to. It was a phenomenon, made stars of everybody. Mike Nichols went on to great direct Carnal Knowledge and Catch 22 and many, many others. He died a couple years ago. Dustin Hoffman's still acting out there, made him a huge star. Catherine Ross went on to make Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, and she ended up marrying an actor, fellow actor. She's been out of the business for many years because she's 85 years old now. And Anne Bancroft won so many awards for that movie. People were shocked that this intelligent, smart, sexy woman, she'd made a lot of movies before this. She was married to Mel Brooks, the comedian who did Young Frankenstein, and the producers. They were married for many, many years, had kids. She loved it. She loved the funny man. And everybody thought, how did this little schmucky guy, that's what he always called himself, get this beautiful woman? Well, if you know anything about human nature, humor and intelligence wins over beauty every time. It does, folks. No matter what the Kardashians tell you. So this is another movie that revolutionized the film industry and was showing Hollywood how important the youth market was. They need to see stories they can relate to. The third film in this trifecta of brilliant films that changed everything and twisted my young mind into 50 different directions was a hippie movie about two bikers who drive across America to essentially find the American dream. It was called Easy Rider. Had a great soundtrack that was popular for the day. Steppenwolf and the band and so many others. The Birds were in the soundtrack. Peter Fonda was Henry Fonda's son. If you know who Henry Fonda is, he's famous actor from the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. His son was the next generation, brother to Jane Fonda, who was a controversial actress who was still acting out there right now. She went on to make Coming Home and Clute, won the Academy Award. Brilliant radical actress who protested the Vietnam War and for many years was referred to as Hanoi Jane because she actually went to Hanoi during the war. Somehow she snuck in there, and a lot of people in this country the right wing mostly thought she was a traitor. Maybe she was. But it was the first time a celebrity put her whole life on the line, her acting career on the line for a political cause she believed in, which was stop the war. She wasn't the only one. John Lennon for the Beatles said, "Stop the war, give peace a chance." Everybody was hoping to stop this war, but it was not stopping. So in the midst of this comes Easy Rider, motorcycle movie about two alternative sort of hippie types who make a drug deal in LA. They make a bunch of money and they go out and get fancy new motorcycles and they drive to New Orleans to Mardi Gras. That's the whole plot, folks. But it's what they find along the way that in lies the truth. They find an ugly America out there of rednecks who hate hippies and hippies who hate rednecks and loose women who have sex with anybody. They meet an America that confused them. Beautiful, shot beautifully by Laszlo Kovacs, immigrant cinematographer. They filmed a lot of it in New Mexico, and I used to live out there, so I saw a lot of the locations. Filmed a lot of it up in Taos, New Mexico, if you know anything about that. It's a beautiful area, spiritual area. And once again, it changed everything. It was a movie made for about $400,000, which is really not much money. When you watch the documentary, I'm going to ask you to watch for the quiz. I'm going to sign the quiz soon, so be ready for that. It was financed by Bert Schneider and his partner Bob Rafelson, who had a success with a TV show. Maybe you've heard of it, called The Monkees. The Monkees was a fake rock and roll group put together to mimic the Beatles' success in Hard Day's Night. And except for there's four guys living in Malibu and the Monkees, and it's on once a week. It was only on the air for 2 years. Huge, phenomenal hit with hit songs. I'm a Believer, Last Train to Clarksville, Stepping Stone, great music, not written by them, of course, written by the writers like Tommy Boyce and Bobby Hart and Neil Diamond, other people wrote the music that became famous. Um, it was a phenomenon. That TV show made a ton of money for these two young producers who then put their money in this movie called Easy Rider. Dennis Hopper knew them and he said, listen, these biker movies make money. Already there'd been a movie called The Wild Angels made by Roger Corman for a couple $100,000, went on to make $5 or $6 million. They can make these movies cheaply outside, no studios, no fancy lighting, just raw footage, put a rock and roll soundtrack to it, and showed at the drive-in. The rest, as they say, is history. And so Rafelson and his partner, Bob Schneider, said, okay, let's do this thing. They gave them the money and they went off on their journey and they filmed this movie that cinched the history, cinched the revolution, lit a fire that Hollywood had to start changing its ways and looking for ways to make more movies like this that for cheap, that can make a lot of money for the youth market. And that started it all. Started with Bonnie and Clyde, went to The Graduate, then in 1968 and 9 went to Easy Rider, and the races were off. That's it. The revolutionary auteur directors, that means the author of their own work, the new directors had stormed the gates, and the gates came down because when there's money to be made, Hollywood will open the gate for you. And for the next 10 years, I'll be talking about this more later because this is what the quiz is going to be about. The auteur directors everywhere from George Lucas, Steve Spielberg to Francis Ford Coppola, Hal Ashby, Robert Altman, Terrence Malick changed the course of cinema history with personal, meaningful auteur films. So let's go on this journey together. Come along with me as we go back in a time machine to 1967. I'm going to show you, I'll post some film clips up there and modules. Please look at them. Get ready for the quiz. Please look at chapter 4. Talk to you next time. The story of film continues.